Marty, we finished module 6 and we're just starting module 7. And I want to remind our viewers out there, the key to organization is, Marty, what's the key to organization?
You're putting me on the spot now. I think it's all about organizing and time management. How about you?
Yeah, and I just want to remind everybody who's watching right now that to be able to be successful in whatever venture you're taking on, you must be organized. And having said that, we are now on module 7, and we're talking about scaling. We're talking about scaling for growth. We're talking about when you start your business and you have that phenomenal vision of creating this massive company, that you keep that vision in mind, because you're going to have to scale as you progress. Marty, what's your feeling about scaling for growth?
Well, I completely agree, Joel. I think it's part of your mission and part of your vision. And more particularly, we talked earlier in the earlier modules about creating a mission statement, which really has to do with, current days. What do you want to do today? When you want to put a man on the moon, you want to win a war. Basically, it really has to do with present day, whereas your vision really talks about where do you see your business in 3 to 5, 10, 15 years from now? Where do you see this going? So if you focus on your vision statement and really concentrate on what's going to be required to get you there, then you'll be into the area of thinking about scalability and how you're going to grow your business. And I think, like you've just said, you really need to be thinking right from the very start about, what is your business going to look like potentially in, 10 to 15 years from now, 5 years from now, and really start thinking about, in every act that you take, be thinking about, does this fit in my ability to scale my business to get there?
Sure. And a lot has to do also with thinking about what you expect your company to achieve for you, whether it's monetary or personal growth. I know I can remember when I was very, very young, the first company that I started, I was 21 at the time. I always wanted a Corvette. I wanted a Corvette in the worst way. So what I used to do in my free time, I'd go into a car dealership and I'd look at this beautiful brand new Corvette. And of course, I was courteous enough not to waste the salesman too much time telling him that I'm not a buyer today, but hopefully one day I will. And I imagine having that Corvette. And a number of years later, I remember going back to the same dealership, seeing the same salesperson. And of course, the first thing the guy said to me, "Not you again." And I said, "Yes, but here's the good news. I'm ready to buy." So it's about vision. It's about motivating yourself on a day-to-day basis and thinking about that Corvette, or thinking about that house, or just thinking about building up a nice pile of cash in the bank, or maybe it's buying your mom a present, maybe whatever it might be. These are the things that you have to keep in mind. Now, if we get back to the company and we talk about scaling, well, as we talked about earlier, you want to keep your expenses very, very low. But that doesn't mean that you can't think about scaling. And I remember the first time when we moved from my partner's basement, where we had literally done production in his garage. And I remember going to our first location, and it was small location. And actually, it was far, far larger than we really needed. So we thought about it. And fortunately enough, the landlord was also the rental agent. And he looked at it and he saw two young guys. And we said, well, we really don't need these 1,500 square feet, but 750 would be perfect. But we also liked the curb appeal of the location. It was a drive-up unit. And the landlord said, these are two young guys starting a company. You know what I'll do? I'll put a wall up in the warehouse and I'll rent out the back half for storage while you guys grow your business. So in fact, the landlord assisted us in scaling for growth. And down the road, as we grew the company, we landed up building a door to the wall that the landlord had created, and we used the full warehouse, and we subsequently moved to many different locations. going forward?
Joel, my story is so similar in that when I started out in my bedroom, and that's where I ran my business from as a young 19-year-old. And I was fortunate enough to lean a little bit on a cousin of mine who happened to have an office that was probably about 1,500 square feet. And he basically rented me one office in there. And I started with the old TV table, the yellow pages, for those of you who remember, and a telephone. And I started calling people and seeing if they would be interested in our services. But I used to run between my office that was located, I think I had 150 square feet, that office, and my bedroom. And I ran the business between those two, keeping expenses down. But, my mind was always about one day I'd own my own place. I'd have my own building. I had a vision. I already knew in my head exactly what that would look like. And the day did come 10 years later where I actually bought my own place. I had 5,000 square feet, exactly the way I envisioned it, about 2,000 feet of office, 3,000 a warehouse. And that lasts us right up until the day we sold our business. And then after that, we were acquired. We moved into, I think, 25,000 square feet. But up until then, that vision of where I wanted to be was extremely important. And I always worked everything, all our equipment, all the plans towards, that goal.
I think when we start a company, I remember quite clearly is that, now we're very calm and we're telling, our viewership, how we felt at a particular time. But I can tell you quite honestly, I was quite nervous at the time. I was I think every step of the way, I was very much concerned about the decisions that I had made. But if you don't make the decisions to move forward, it's impossible to grow your business. I remember a friend of mine who's actually he's exited a very, very large company in manufacturing towels in the towel industry and in the bedding industry. And what he did is I remember him calling me up and he said, Joel, I have a 30,000 square foot facility now, and I'm thinking of moving to a 50,000 square foot facility. He said, but the problem is it's more than I need. And I really wasn't able to give him any recommendation because I really didn't know the financial structure of his company. But I listened to him talk, and lo and behold, he went into this 50,000 square foot facility. And in no time at all, he got orders. He was able to do more with the facility and he grew the business. So you have to take the chance to make the leap. Try and be as conservative, try and cover yourself, but you can't cover yourself for a year or 2 or 3 years of rent. So you have to be prepared to go out and create the business that will make the decision of you moving into a larger facility work.
Joel, it's again interesting you mentioned that because an old friend of mine who was a motivational speaker for many, many years and a business expert used to always say that you have to be a bit uncomfortable every day. You always have to be uncomfortable in business. The time you get into trouble is when you get comfortable. And like your friend and like yourself, we did the same thing. I mean, the first facility I moved into was 2,500 square feet. And it was to rent, not to buy. And I just remember trying to think how am I ever going to make rent? Like, there's no way I'm going to make rent. And I started thinking about, can I maybe rent part of this place out to a friend? But, and I also realized at that time, I really only needed about 500 feet or 1,000 feet. But it took a very, very short period of time to where all of a sudden the mess expanded to fill the space. And I was using all 2,500 feet and I was receiving way more than my rent. Everything worked out. And exactly the same thing happened 5 years of that. When I doubled that size, moved to 5,000 feet and owned the place, I thought exactly the same thing. I was so uncomfortable and I lived in such fear at that time of how am I going to pay, the mortgage and how I'm going to use all this space. But it's amazing that, when you set those expectations, how much at that point you are able to actually fulfill using all of that space and become successful. And the other thing, I wanted to mention was that it's important to have that map, that idea right from the start. You wouldn't, if you were going on a 7-day trip and decided to do a road trip, you wouldn't just get in your car and say, hey, Google, take me anywhere, right? So it's really important to plan your route, know your destination. Otherwise, any road will take you there. So you got to decide on what road you're going to take, how you're going to get to your goal, what stops you're going to make along the way. But you have to be a bit uncomfortable almost all the time when you're in business. And that takes a certain type of person with a lot of perseverance and quite frankly, a lot of guts. And that's the difference between being a successful entrepreneur and working for somebody else.
I think there's a sense that you sort of feel that you're walking on the ledge, you're walking on the edge.
Yeah.
I remember when we bought our building, which was quite a substantial building at the time. Went in to look at the facility, saw this massive warehouse, and in fact, the office space available in the building that we were looking to buy was a little bit smaller than what we had. But when I looked at the warehouse, I envisioned that we could squeeze into the office facility, but this magnificent, enormous warehouse, we probably could put a second story right across, because the ceiling heights, I think at the time, were about 30 or 30 plus feet. And so I brought in an architect before we bought the building. And I asked him, I said, is it feasible down the road to actually build the mezzanine? And he said, yes, you definitely can. So knowing that, we bought the building, and about 2 years in the building, we decided to actually build the mezzanine, and we filled up that mezzanine. It became a fantastic facility, a building that was actually supposed to be maybe 30% offices and 70% warehouse. We flipped it around to 70% office, 30% warehouse. So it's kind of like the vision. You're not prepared to do it now, but you envision that you will do it later. And it's not a hard fact that you're necessarily going to do it, but you have it in your mind. And Marty mentioned something earlier, that you have to make decisions that put you a lot on edge. And there's no question about it, but you have to continuously move the goalposts, because you are going to achieve the goals that you set. But once you do, you got to keep moving those goalposts, keep pushing yourself where you feel you're a little bit on the edge. And it makes you, I think there's a degree of nervousness that you have to sense. When I used to go to the office in the morning and I'd be driving to the office, I would have a little bit of butterflies, not significant, but enough to make me edgy, to get me to perform when I got to the office. Now we're going to go into, we've got the facility. Well, it's great you got the facility, but now let's talk about the management team. How did you build your management team, Marty?
Joel, I'm going to talk about that momentarily, but I hadn't realized until this conversation with you today that how parallel our lives really were, because we did exactly the same thing in our warehouse as you did in yours. And we converted what was originally warehouse into office, and we did the same flip of 30-70 to 70-30. And we actually ended up building a mezzanine where we moved a lot of our storage onto that mezzanine and converted the other part of it to office. And that was a result of, and this is another really important topic, that was a result of changing technology. And what happened was we were in the beginning very equipment heavy in our business. And as time went along, technology took over, and we didn't have to have the massive amount of equipment that we used to have. And of course, we moved from an analog world to a digital world. So much of what we were keeping on analog became digital. And of course, massive amounts of storage ended up being on a computer as opposed to physically. So we converted our office over. But anyway, it was just interesting observation that we almost had an identical parallel pathway forward with our business as you did with yours. But talking about building the management team, Joel, I think, one of the things that we did in building our management team was, the first and foremost was we were to focus on our core strengths. You really have to, and we've talked about this earlier in earlier modules, really focus on your strengths, and you really have to try not to be everything to everybody. Again, looking at the largest companies today, without mentioning any of them, just look at the largest companies and understand that the ones who are most successful are very, very focused on a very few services and a very few products. They're not the kind of companies that have 1,000 choices. They have one or two, but they're really the best at them. So we did the same thing with our management team. Is one of the first things we looked at was we started looking at senior executives, people who could run divisions, whether it be marketing or sales or finance. So we began to look at almost like division leaders, I would say. Where that led to down the road was hiring our first COO. So it was our first entry into what we would call today a C-suite of people. And probably one of the most important people you can hire to start out with is a chief operating officer. I think it's probably the most key position almost in any company, because it keeps things going and allows you as an entrepreneur to do what you do best. After that, we hired a chief revenue officer, somebody who could look after the revenue and the sales side of things, because obviously that's up there with oxygen as well. So making sure the revenue comes in. You might argue that the chief revenue person should be in front of your chief operating officer, operating officer, but they're both important, and it's really a chicken and egg situation. It's really what your company needs most of at the time. If revenue seems to be flowing in fairly easily, and it's your operations and your quality control and that type of thing that really needs working at, then you hire in that direction. If you find that you have really good quality control and operations, and you're using technology to its fullest, it might be hiring a chief revenue guy. And then the next guy after all that to hire, in my opinion, would probably be your CFO, which is a chief financial officer. And that's a person who brings an immense amount of help to you in a variety of different ways. It's not just managing your books and managing your accounting, but it's the strategic pathway forward to finance in terms of, how do you manage your company in relationship to tax, in relationship to, the governing authority, whether that be the IRS or the CRA, and really strategically how you can use bank money and other people's money to build your business, how you can get cheapest rates, and all the strategies involved around finance. And then eventually, I think you get to a point in your business where if you are the CEO, I think, towards the latter part of your business, you really got to decide are you the best person for your job? And there's cases where the best thing you can do is fire yourself. And that's a tough decision. That's probably one of the toughest decisions you make, is say, look, I'm going to move over to become chairman of the board, and I'm going to hire a new CEO because you believe that maybe there's somebody out there who can do a better job than you. And I think that's an important thing. And part of that, Joel, the final comment I'll make is that also boils around the fact of whether you want to be a lifestyle business or whether you want to be a company. And again, I think we talked about this earlier, but it's really important to reiterate this. If you want to be a lifestyle company and have everybody work with you because they know you as Martin or they know you as Joel, you're going to have some real limitations, because you become the major asset of the company. And even people who value you are going to value your business with a very small multiple, because they're going to see you as being essential to the business. So one of the things you also want to do, one of the moves in firing yourself, is sometimes to make yourself the least important person in your company. And in your case, Joel, certainly people, although they knew your face from a marketing perspective, certainly people knew Alarm Force more for the company name than they even knew you in the long run. And that created the value so much in your name and what your company did. So it's really important, if you want to separate yourself from a lifestyle business to a business, to really check your ego in at the door, like put your ego aside and realize there are people who can do your job equally or better, and try and erase yourself so that the value of the company becomes your company name and your brand and not yourself.
I think that's very, very true. But in my case, I used to, what I did at all times from the start of the company till the time that I left, all I thought about was sales, sales, sales. Anything that I did was related to creating sales. And you know, a lot of times my partner who ran the financial side of the company, he'd say, Joe, how are we going to deal with those sales? I said, I have to tell you something. Have the problem, you will figure out the solution. And that's where, as Marty mentioned earlier, you'll end up bringing in your management team to make sure that the dollars are collected, to make sure that the goods are delivered, to make sure that the installers are available. But it all emanates from sales. So what I did, I would hire salesmen, put them out, get them out in my first company, which was business to business, get those salespeople out, get them knocking on doors, get them working the different systems to find, using the yellow pages at the time, which today, of course, would be the internet. Get those people out knocking doors. You can create the best management structure, and you could land up going out of business. So, having said that, I want to reiterate: sales, sales, and sales. And if you don't take the initiative to hire the salesman, where yes, you're going to have to pay him a salary to start, and you're going to have to give him commission, and you may have to help him with car allowance. That is an investment to make you money. And you may be using advertisement. If you're gun shy about saying, well, I don't know if I'm going to go on Facebook, I don't know if I'm going to do this type of marketing on the internet. If you don't make that investment, you will never get the return, and you will have no reason to build a management structure.
Totally agree, Joel. In fact, interestingly enough, about 2 or 3 months into my business, when I was 19 years old, I remember I was on the phone morning till night, and all of a sudden I picked up way more business than I can handle. And I was panicking. I was probably had perspiration running down my face. And I remember my cousin walking in at that time, the same person I had rented the offices from. And he said, "What's wrong?" He said, you look like you've seen a ghost." And I said, I remember saying to him, "I don't know what I'm going to do. I have so much business. I don't know how to handle it." And he just smiled and he said, "You know what? Hopefully this will be your problem from now until the day you die." He said, "Just go out there and get the business. Once you have the business, you'll figure out how to do it." Now, having said that, it is still very important to build a very strong team around you of very talented people. And sometimes you're just going to have to overpay for that. You're going to have to pay tomorrow's price today, and you're going to have to maybe not take a salary yourself. And it's sometimes a very tough thing to do when you're paying somebody a pretty good decent salary and commissions, and you're sitting there starving to death. But that's part of being an entrepreneur. So you have to hire individuals who have the skills, who have the passion that can help you scale as well. And you have to delegate to them the responsibilities and empower those team members to take ownership in their particular areas of the business. So I would say to you that making sure that you streamline your processes wherever possible. And above all, the other comment I want to make is, remember, in the earlier modules, I said there's always going to be that person who's going to find a way to do things cheaper, faster, better. Well, better that person be you than be somebody else. So you always want to be looking at cheaper, faster, better. And part of that is to engage and embrace technology. You have to have a passion today for technology, and you have to embrace it in a way that all you're looking to do all the time is to change. And again, we talked earlier about this. One of the barriers to success is because the vast majority of people are afraid of change. They're not only afraid of change, they hate change. And quite candidly, and I'm really happy to share this with you at this point, to Joel, with you and the audience, up until in my first 10 years of business, my greatest fear in business was change. I just wanted everything to stay the same. I had things going pretty good. My equipment was all running. I was an expert. I was leading the pack at the time in terms of my knowledge of the business. And I just wanted everything just to stay the same. And when it started to change, particularly when digital came in and really threatened my entire business, I was in a state for at least a good 2 to 3 years, living in fear, not knowing what this change meant to me. But it was around that time also that I took on a partner and who embraced change. And together, I learned how to embrace change. And today, ironically enough, I am the complete opposite of what I used to be. Change doesn't happen fast enough for me. I love change. I love new technology. It goes so slow for me right now. And years ago, it would have been going way too fast. So you really need to embrace change. I really need to be a change agent. You need to embrace technology in order to scale.
What's interesting, I remember years ago when we had a lot of salespeople out on the road and they were knocking on business to business to put in card access systems, alarm technology, video cameras, things of this sort. And I took a look for all the salespeople. We had a secretary, that's what they were called at the time, an assistant who was actually preparing all the quotations on their typewriters. And then Apple came along with the Macintosh computer, and I was watching this happen. And I said, that sounds, and word processing. You know what? I called up Apple and I bought an Apple computer. It was a classic one or something. And my partner, who was actually the operating guy, he said, what's he doing with a computer? It's like computers are crazy. I started using the computer, and my idea was if I could get rid of my assistant, then that would mean all the salespeople, and we had about 25 to 30 salespeople operating. I get rid of about, there's about one secretary for every two sales reps. We get rid of about 12, 13 people. Anyways, I did get rid of my assistant, and I landed up doing my own quotations, my own word processing myself. Then I called up my operating partner, and I said, you know what? What I want every sales guy to get a computer. And that's when they had the IBM had just come up, IBM compatible computers. He said, are you crazy? I said, I insist upon it. And no question about it. I forced them, we put the computers in, and we got rid of an overhead of 12 labor. Incredible cost of labor was reduced significantly. So I was not a computer expert. I'm always been interested in change, but I was interested in forcing myself to also learn this new technology. And as we know, computers are commonplace. They're used in business. We use them every single day. And it proved to be the right decision. So it's making these decisions within your business that are going to make you more effective. You're going to have to spend extra money. You're going to have to make that investment. And it's possible that the first computer, in our case, it could have been a write-off. But I call it R&Ding your business on an ongoing basis.
Absolutely, Joel. And I think, sometimes in making these decisions, although this is somewhat related, but not directly. I think, sometimes as an entrepreneur, you are forced almost on a daily basis to make decisions. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about that to tell you that I was one of those individuals who had difficulty sometimes in making that decision. I knew what the right thing was. I loved change, but actually making the decision to go ahead and buy that computer or move to the next technology, sometimes I got so caught up in making the decision that it ended up delaying what should have happened a lot earlier. And so what I did, or would suggest to our followers, is that there's another way of making decisions, and that is to make a choice. And making a choice as opposed to making a decision is a very fine line. And some of you are saying, well, what's the difference between a choice and a decision? Well, a decision is where you weigh out all the pros and the cons. You look at, what are the good things that could happen? What are the bad things? When you start to do that, so often you end up on this barbed wire fence in the middle that you can't really cross over either side. You just can't make the decision. So what I say to people today is when it gets down to the point where you have a very serious decision and it seems that, either road A or road B could, probably be a possible answer for you. What I would say is rather than belabor the decision, just make a choice. Just because, not based on what the advantages are, not based on what disadvantages are. If you're looking at two things and they seem about equal, just go ahead and make the choice and go with it. It's really, really relieving because it takes the decision-making process away. And the chances are, whatever road you went down, probably you're going to be successful. So just choose one, go with it, and do the best with it. And the worst that happens is, like we talked earlier, is you fail. And failure is a part of success. So if you fail, then you go back to the other road. But making choices as opposed to decisions are something I would highly recommend as well.
Yeah, and I think, in running a company, in running your life, because the company is part of your life, it's not your whole life. I think you have to put pressure on yourself. Examples of pressure. I'd started a young family. We were living in an apartment, not a condo, and it was obvious that we needed a house. Well, I wasn't making enough money to afford a house. So I did something that most people would probably say you're crazy. I went out looking at houses and I found a house. And the house at the time was a lot of money to me. And I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to put as long a closing on this property as possible. And I'm going to make sure over that period of time that I'm going to accumulate the capital to be able to buy the house. And the house at the time had a $7,000 mortgage on it. Well, lo and behold, I made an offer on the house and I said, 6-month closing. And of course, the real estate agent said, are you crazy? But the market at that time in Montreal was not very good. I don't think it's very good now anyway, but it wasn't very good. And lo and behold, they took the offer at 6 months. And of course, my partner at the time, he said, Joel, how are you buying a house? You can't afford to buy a house. I said to my partner, you watch me. We're going to accumulate enough money that I'm going to be able to take the full amount of the balance of the cost of the house and be able to maintain a $7,000 mortgage, which was extremely ridiculously low. Lo and behold, that 6 months, I had such pressure on myself that I worked so hard in creating sales. And I created a ton of sales. The closing of the property came due. I went to my partner. I said, I need X amount of dollars. Cut a check for you and cut a check for me. And lo and behold, I bought my first house. But if I hadn't put the pressure on myself, the need that my family required a home, my kids needed a home, I don't think I would have achieved it. So my message, pressure, utilized properly, can help you become successful. If you're lackadaisical and you have no pressure and you have no need to persevere, then you won't make it.
I think if you're looking for comfort, probably entrepreneurship is not your place. I totally agree, Joel. And I think you're really referring to the bigger issue of risk and risk taking. And it's really, really has to be a solid ingredient within your body that you're willing, able, capable, and committed to taking risks, like buying things sometimes that you consider to be essentials that maybe you can't afford, and working towards the fact and putting that pressure on yourself to achieve that goal. And one of the ways in which you do that is when you're in business, and you do put yourself in this situation of either taking a risk or buying something that maybe you can't quite afford, but you think that down the road, if business is good enough, you will, is to expand your business. And part of expanding your business is to expand your customer base. And so to scale and to expand that customer base, you need to develop you need to have at the very beginning a very clear marketing and sales strategy, which involves not only digital marketing, but other things outside of digital marketing that we talked about earlier. And the key thing is, what you want to try to do in any marketing or any sales campaign is to attract new customers and to obviously keep existing ones. So we call that recruitment and retention of customers. But the scary part of this is, and this is really what I want to ask you, Joel, is your experience with this, is sometimes when you go out there and you're overly successful with getting new customers and retaining the ones you've got, sometimes those things don't work too well hand in hand, because you go out and get a whole bunch of new customers, but then you've got to service them, right? And all of a sudden, if you expand, let's say, too quickly, and all of a sudden your quality control goes down and you don't have enough systems to put in, or the technology is not there to support it, you don't have enough server space. So there's this trade-off between getting a whole bunch of new customers while at the same time keeping the quality of your services up, not only to support the new customers, but also to support the ones you have. So what was your experience with doing this? And did you run into these issues where, quality control became a problem as a result of trying to grow your business?
I would say you're definitely right. I think it's kind of like a chart where you're at the pinnacle at one point, then you do your expansion into another city or another territory. And in that area, you have not enough service representatives, and then you run into a service problem. There's no question, over my many, many years of running companies, on a consistent basis over time, we have always had a delivery problem. Not constant, but at a particular point in time. So you have to be able to deal with it. If you're dealing business to business and the customers are complaining that the service is not what it used to be, you have to acknowledge that. You have to acknowledge to your customer and say, you're absolutely right. I'm very sorry. We are having that problem. This is what we're doing to correct it. It may take a few weeks or a few months. Please stand by us and we will correct it. And in fact, we did. And in fact, most customers did stand by it. And that's how we were able to grow the entity. But running a company successfully and growing it, you're going to have growing pains. And these pains are going to be delivery issues, manufacturing issues, problems with product in the field that doesn't work. And how you deal with these problems is going to indicate whether or not you're going to go downhill with your company or just straight line it, or whether you have the ability to grow. So the answer is yes. Problems on an ongoing basis, depending where we were on each area of expansion or each area of the country, or whether it was in the US or whether it was in Canada. We knew what problems we would have, and we became prepared to deal with them as they occurred.
Yeah, and I think you're talking about two very important things, and that's honesty and integrity and transparency, with your customers. And when people call you out and say, hey, there's a problem, to deny them or deflect them certainly can lead to failure. And if you're just honest with them, and tell them, look, yeah, we are having a problem, but we're fixing it, and we really value your loyalty. Stay with us, and you'll be very happy. Is I think what you're saying, and I think that's totally what we did, and I agree with that strategy. Sometimes, Joel, to do all this stuff, when you're looking at expanding, or you're looking at either shoring up your operations or expanding your revenue, often that will require funding. It's really important, in my estimation, that you are really looking ahead at the potential of securing funding. And there's a number of ways you can do that. Whether it be done through angel investors, crowdfunding, loans, and a variety of other different ways, putting in your own money, which way you need to do it. But the one thing I would encourage, as we did in previous modules, is you want to find the cheapest money possible, and you only want to use the money that you need. So part of that is, if one of the best ways, obviously, is to go to a bank. And one of the ways you have to go to a bank is you have to make a very compelling business case to them. So you have to be thinking ahead of time with your accountant, or if you're lucky enough to have a CFO at that point, about having a very, very solid financial plan, which not only shows the projections, the budgets, the fees from the revenue from last year, the revenue from this year, but also demonstrates to them how you're going to scale your business, what you're using the money for, how you're going to use that money to scale your business, and what, very importantly, will be what's known as the ROI, or return on investment. So you need to go and convince that bank. And if you can convince them, and they can open up a line of credit for you at a rate that's very comparable to prime, or prime plus a little bit, then you could be borrowing money at a fairly inexpensive amount. But the key thing to a nice line of credit is you're only using on a day-to-day basis what you need. And you're only paying for what you're using, as opposed to going out to somebody and saying, hey, I need to borrow $1 million. You start paying for that day one, and let's say you only need $100,000, but you're paying interest on an extra $900,000 that you don't need. So by far the preferable loan is a line of credit from the bank at as close to prime as possible. And if you are looking at an angel investor, a private equity, a venture capitalist, you've got to be willing to dilute on your company. That means giving up shares in your company, giving up a position, a percentage in your company for the idea of bringing in money and expertise outside of you. And there's a lot of pros to that and a lot of cons to that. And it really depends at the end of the day how much of your business you want to end up with and how much you value somebody else coming in almost as a partner, both in terms of revenue and advice.
Yeah, my first company, it was a private entity, a private company. But in my last company, Alarm Force, we did bring the company public. So I was a big believer that we needed capital to grow the business. So we got some private public. We did a private placement in the early days, and once that happened, the investor had a choice of either us paying back the money over time. It was like a convertible debenture, and they did convert, so they had equity in the company. Then we brought the company public, and subsequently went to the markets a number of times until the company became a cash cow and we did not have to raise any more capital. But I personally very much like running a public company. I think having directors having a board of directors allows you to be forces you to be more disciplined, forces you to do better reporting, and you subsequently will land up running a more successful company. So that's my experience, having run both private and public.
Yeah, and when it comes to measuring, and monitoring your key metrics, often you'll hear the expression KPIs, which stands for key performance indicators. So it's really important to look at your KPIs to track your progress, measure your success, and to analyze your key metrics, which a public company would certainly force you to do. So you have to constantly monitor these metrics, identify the trends, you look for the areas of improvement, but regularly review and address address your strategies and adjust your strategies, quite frankly, to these insights. And part of doing that, and part of looking at your KPIs on a very regular basis, is also fostering strategic partnerships, because I think by forging these strategic partnerships with other business suppliers, industry experts, you can end up collaborating with them in such a way that they will help you. They will help you share costs. They'll help you gain insights. They'll help you with knowledge. They can mentor you. Just as Joel indicated earlier about where, he had a supplier and they needed a little bit more time to pay. So these are the people that become your partners. So look for strategic partnerships with your suppliers. Look for strategic partnerships even with your competition. You'd be very surprised. I talked about that earlier. Sometimes your competitors can be your best friends, and old expression, sometimes it's better the devil you know, right? So look to your competitors. They're not your enemies. They're your competitors. They're actually, competitors can be very, very good for business. And you could decide, that, hey, we're competing, but, why don't we set up a central marketplace where we, as a group can come together and we're better together than we are apart. That doesn't even mean necessarily merging or acquiring another company. It just means working together cooperatively. So there's a lot of things that you can do to forge these partnerships, and remember to continue to look at your KPIs, constantly doing the analysis as to where the trends are taking you and measuring your results.
Yeah, in every company that I was involved in, we always had what we called, which is very common, our secret sauce. And because we had this secret sauce, I never liked to be on very, very good terms with my competition. That doesn't mean I was on bad terms. It means I had virtually no relationship whatsoever. I was always had the fear that if they really got to know me, they might say, that guy's not as sharp as I thought he was. So maybe we can compete better with him. So I kind of like stayed away from him. I think we have to remember that it's a gradual process in scaling for growth. It takes time, it takes personal pressure, it takes vision, and it takes a willingness to want to grow. And on that note, I've said everything that I could possibly say about scaling for growth. Anything you want to add in closing off this module, Marty?
No, I agree with you, Joel. I really think careful execution and planning towards the goal you're trying to achieve is key, and measuring that success, making sure you have the funding in place, making sure you have the partners. And even when it comes to your competition, Joel, I do agree. We always had our secret sauce, and we were able to sort of balance a little bit. I think the real answer is a bit of a hybrid situation. I think you can keep your secret sauce, not give it away, but balance that between kind of giving things outside of your secret sauce to have the common ground to build with other people. But I do totally agree. There are just certain things that obviously you've got to keep very close to your very close to heart, and there's just certain cards you've got to keep up your sleeve that you don't share. But I think there is a balancing act between the two. But I do agree that scaling is a gradual process. And if you follow all the ingredients that we've given you on this module, I think these are all keys to success.
And on that note, we will see you at Module 8.